My name is Major Dana Reeves, United States Army stationed at Fort Liberty, North Carolina. Veterans Day, November 11th, 2023 was supposed to be a day of remembrance. A day to honor my son, Private First Class Jacob Reeves, who gave his life saving two fellow soldiers during an evacuation in Kabul. It should have been sacred quiet and dignified. Instead, it became the day my parents decided to turn grief into a spectacle. The morning air at Fort Liberty carried that sharp autumn chill that smells faintly of metal and pine. Rows of flags lined the field outside the memorial hall, their edges snapping crisply against the wind. Hundreds of chairs were set in perfect formation. I stood in my dress blues medals aligned gloves pressed the kind of posture that holds your soul together when everything else has cracked. The band played softly in the distance, brass notes drifting above murmurs of families in heavy coats. When they called the Gold Star families to stand, I rose. My heart pounded slow and heavy. I felt Jacob's dog tags resting cold against my chest right over my heartbeat. He used to joke that they were lucky charms. For a second, I believed it. My parents arrived late. Everyone turned to look. Martin and Elaine Reeves, my father and mother, had a way of entering a room like it belonged to them. My mother wore a white coat with pearls and sunglasses, though the sky was overcast. My father wore his golf club blazer, hands in his pockets, chin raised as if the ceremony were beneath him. They didn't sit quietly. I could feel them even before I saw them, the scent of my mother's perfume cutting through the cold air like sugar on steel. When the master of ceremonies began reading the names of the fallen, a hush fell over the crowd. The sound of flags flapping was all that moved. And then I heard it, the voice I had spent a lifetime trying to tune out. My mother's. "Maybe if you'd been a better mother," she said, her tone low but slicing clear through the silence, "your son wouldn't have died playing soldier." It was the kind of sentence that makes the air disappear. The words hung there uninvited and unforgivable. I heard the quiet gasps from the people seated nearby. One young sergeant looked away. Another clenched his jaw. No one moved. No one spoke. My back remained straight, my chin level, eyes forward. The wind carried another sound, my father's laugh. "You lost your boy and your marriage because of that uniform," he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach the first two rows. "Some hero you are." My ears rang. For a split second I thought I had misheard him, but then I saw the faint smile pulling at his mouth, and I knew. My commanding officer, Colonel Hayes, shifted uneasily in his seat. The camera from the local news station panned slightly toward us. Someone coughed, trying to drown the tension, but it was too late. The poison had already spread. My mother leaned forward and whispered something else, and though I couldn't catch the words, I saw the pitying look of the woman sitting beside her. My face stayed still, but every muscle in my body screamed. Years of discipline, years of leadership, all compressed into one unbearable second of humiliation. I thought about Jacob, his last phone call from Afghanistan, his steady voice saying, "I'm proud of you, Mom." He never once saw me as weak. My parents always had. I could have turned, could have said something sharp enough to slice the air in half, but the Army had trained me for control. Control is survival. So I swallowed the heat in my throat, lifted my chin higher, and locked my gaze on the flag ahead. I waited until the announcer said Major Reeves' Gold Star Mother. I walked toward the podium. My heels clicked against the platform, a rhythm steadier than my heartbeat. I opened my prepared remarks, 3 paragraphs about sacrifice duty and love, but my voice caught before the second line. From behind me, I heard my mother whisper again, this time louder. "At least now she'll get sympathy. Finally, something she's good at." My father chuckled. The microphone caught it faintly, just enough to carry through the speakers. A ripple of laughter passed across the rows like wind through dry leaves. That was the moment something inside me broke, not with noise, but with clarity. I closed the folder in my hands. I looked at the audience uniforms, medals, families with folded flags, and I realized this ceremony had stopped being about Jacob the moment they arrived. It had become another performance for people who worship appearances more than truth. I turned to the colonel, met his eyes, and said quietly, "Sir, request permission to step out." His nod was barely visible, but it was enough. I stepped down from the stage, the camera still following me, still catching the flash of my rank and ribbons as I walked away. My parents didn't stop me. They didn't stand. They just watched, satisfied as if they'd won something. Outside, the wind was colder, the sky a hard shade of gray. The sound of the band faded behind me. I stood by the memorial wall, tracing Jacob's engraved name with my gloved fingers, and for the first time in years, I felt something sharper than pain. I felt purpose forming quietly under the surface. That was the day my parents didn't just break my heart. They broke my silence. I was born in Savannah, Georgia in the summer of 1982, into a house where silence meant survival. My father, Martin Reeves, was a man who ran his home the way he ran his short-lived business ventures, with sharp orders, strict appearances, and an obsession with how things looked from the outside. My mother, Elaine, played her part like a politician's wife. She never raised her voice, never left the house without lipstick, and never admitted when something was wrong. To the neighbors, we were the perfect Southern family. Inside, it was glass, fragile, and cold. My earliest memories aren't of warmth, but of arrangement shoes lined perfectly by the door dinner plates that matched the wallpaper conversations rehearsed before company came. I learned young that love in our house came with conditions. My father measured worth by compliance. My mother measured worth by appearance. There was no space for mistakes or softness. When I cried after falling off my bike at 6, my father said, "We don't raise quitters." My mother dabbed my knees with alcohol, not sympathy, and whispered, "Hold your posture, darling. People are watching." People were always watching. Savannah had a way of magnifying judgment, the manicured lawns, the church bells on Sunday, the polite gossip that traveled faster than the tide. My parents thrived on it. Their friends were realtors, bankers, and old money heirs who praised my mother's poise and my father's discipline. They didn't see the tension underneath the sharp looks across the table, the quiet corrections after every meal. I grew up learning that dignity wasn't about truth. It was about control. School was my refuge. Books didn't judge. The library didn't talk. I'd sit for hours reading about distant places and brave people who didn't need permission to exist. By high school, I had become the quiet achiever, the straight-A student who never attended parties, who carried her own lunch, who teachers said had a future. My father wanted me to study finance. "Money builds respect," he said. My mother added, "and respect keeps you safe." But respect in our home was fear dressed in pearls. When I turned 21, the recruiter's office on Abercorn Street looked like freedom. The Army wasn't part of my parents' plan, and that was exactly why I signed the papers. The recruiter, a staff sergeant named Carter, looked at me like I was from another world when I said I wanted to enlist instead of marry my boyfriend from church. "You sure, ma'am?" he asked. "This isn't the Savannah Garden Club." "Exactly," I said. I joined the Army that August against every plea threat and ultimatum my parents could muster. My mother called it a phase. My father called it a disgrace. I called it breathing. Basic training stripped away everything I'd been told I was supposed to be. The first time I ran 5 miles in full gear, drenched in sweat and mud, I felt something close to rebirth. For once, my worth wasn't measured by silence. It was measured by effort. By the time I commissioned as an officer, I'd built a new identity. But my family never stopped treating it as rebellion. They visited once when I was stationed in Texas. My father looked around the base and said, "So, this is where our daughter decided to throw away her future." My mother smiled for the photo but whispered, "Stand taller, dear. The uniform doesn't hide everything." I met Captain Mark Collins at Fort Hood during a training rotation. He was steady in a way that made the noise in my head quiet down. He listened not to fix me but to understand. We got married the year I turned 26. My parents didn't come. They sent a card that said, "We wish you wisdom in your choices." That was their version of a blessing. When our son Jacob was born the next year, something inside me finally softened. Holding him, I realized that love didn't have to hurt. He had Mark's calm eyes and my stubborn jaw. We built a small, happy world around routine morning runs, bedtime stories, pancakes on Sundays. Mark used to say, "Home is what we build, not what we inherit." I believed him. My parents visited once when Jacob was 5. My mother brought a camera and staged photos of herself holding him on the porch as if she'd been there all along. My father asked if I planned to keep this Army thing going or settle down like a proper mother. Mark smiled politely and said, "Sir, her strength is exactly what makes her a good mother." The conversation ended in silence. In 2011, everything changed. A training accident took Mark's life. The Army called it mechanical failure, but all I heard was absence. The folded flag they handed me felt heavier than my own body. My parents came to the funeral wearing black that looked brand new. My father shook hands with officers like he was networking at a conference. My mother gave a eulogy she wrote herself, one that ended with, "At least he died serving something." It wasn't grief. It was branding. I stood behind her, frozen, holding Jacob's small hand, and realized that even death couldn't make them human. After Mark's death, I transferred to North Carolina to raise Jacob closer to the coast. The ocean became our therapy. We'd walk the shoreline on weekends, throwing pebbles, racing waves. He grew up with laughter instead of lectures. At 12, he fixed a neighbor's old radio just because he wanted to make something broken work again. He was my mirror, but brighter. When he turned 18, he told me he wanted to enlist. I remember the fear that hit first, then pride right after. "I want to serve like Dad," he said, "and like you." I didn't try to stop him. You can't teach courage and then forbid its practice. My parents called when they found out. My mother's voice was sharp even through the phone line. "Haven't you punished that boy enough with your military nonsense?" My father added, "You're passing down bad genetics of foolishness." I ended the call mid-sentence. I thought about cutting ties completely, but family, even toxic family, has a way of holding a shadow over your conscience. Part of me kept believing they might change. That illusion lasted until August 2021. Jacob was stationed near Kabul during the final evacuation operations. He was 19. I was working late in my office at Fort Liberty when the message came through. The words were simple, sterile casualty notification. Private First Class Jacob Reeves. The rest blurred. They said he had pulled 2 injured soldiers away from the blast before the second explosion hit. The Army called it heroism. My body called it heartbreak. The next morning, I flew to Dover for the dignified transfer. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that eats sound. When they opened the cargo bay, I saw the flag-draped case and thought, this can't be the end of my child's story. My parents didn't come. They sent flowers, white lilies, the same ones my mother used for dinner centerpieces. On the card, she wrote, "We told you the world would take him." It felt less like condolence, more like accusation. The following weeks were a blur of ceremonies, interviews, and polite condolences. Every Gold Star family walks a different path through grief. Mine walked it alone. At night, I'd sit at the kitchen table, Jacob's photo beside me, letters from soldiers he'd saved, stacked neatly in a folder. Each one said the same thing. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think of himself. He just acted. That's the kind of courage my parents would never understand. I returned to duty after 3 months. Work was the only thing that made sense, structure, order, purpose. But every time a family visited the base, I felt that familiar ache. I envied them their togetherness. My parents called once that year out of curiosity more than care. "You still wearing the uniform?" my father asked. I said yes. "Maybe it's time you stop playing soldier too," he replied. I remember staring at the phone after the call ended, realizing there was no bottom to their cruelty. Still, I kept a line open. Maybe hope isn't logical. Maybe it's a habit. I told myself they were old, that pride can rot good people from the inside, and that maybe loss had broken something in them too. But the truth was simpler. They were never built for empathy. The years between Jacob's death and that Veterans Day ceremony were a slow drift between duty and denial. I promoted to major. I mentored young officers, signed condolence letters, attended memorials. Each time I stood before a folded flag, I thought of my son. Each time I heard the anthem, I felt both pride and sorrow fight for space in my chest. My mother would occasionally send newspaper clippings of society events with notes like, "You should visit sometime. People still ask about you." My father once mailed a brochure for a real estate venture with a sticky note, "If you're ever done with the Army, maybe you could do something real." I never replied. The distance between Savannah and Fort Liberty is 260 miles, but emotionally, it felt like another planet. Still, when the Army invited Gold Star families to the 2023 Veterans Day ceremony, I put their names on the list. Maybe it was politeness. Maybe it was masochism. A small part of me still believed that standing before Jacob's name might awaken something human in them, that they would see not just a uniform, but a daughter. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, I practiced my speech at night, reading it aloud in an empty room. It wasn't long, just 2 minutes about honor, sacrifice, and love. Every time I reached the line, my son gave everything for the country that raised him. My voice broke. I imagined my parents sitting quietly, maybe even proud for once. I imagined healing. I should have known better. Looking back now, that was my flaw, believing that blood meant bond, that shared history meant shared heart. The truth is, some families love the reflection of you more than your reality. They loved the version they could brag about at brunch, not the one that bled and served and grieved. I can see that clearly now. But on that morning, standing in the mirror, buttoning my dress blues, I still believed redemption was possible. I still believed my parents might see me. I didn't know that within hours they would destroy that illusion completely. I didn't know that the people who taught me to fear humiliation would deliver it with an audience and a camera. That's the cruel irony of my family. We never just hurt behind closed doors. We hurt where everyone could see it. That belief in change, the final remnant of the daughter they once molded, died that Veterans Day. It's strange how love can linger long after respect has gone. I suppose that's why I invited them. Hope, even misplaced, is hard to bury. But that day, when the world watched and the wind carried my mother's words across the memorial field, I understood something I had spent 41 years resisting. Some bloodlines don't bind. They suffocate, and until you cut them loose, you never truly breathe. October 2023 began with the kind of stillness that always comes before something breaks. The summer heat had finally lifted from North Carolina, and the mornings at Fort Liberty turned cool, quiet, and deceptively calm. I'd just returned from a week-long leadership workshop in Washington when the email landed in my inbox. Subject line: Veterans Memorial Recognition Ceremony. Invitation for Gold Star families. I stared at it longer than I should have. Every year, the Army held the event to honor fallen soldiers and their families, a gathering meant to be both solemn and unifying. It had been 2 years since Jacob's name was added to the memorial wall, and though I'd attended smaller base ceremonies before, this one felt different. The message carried the seal of the U.S. Army Public Affairs Office, and the details were printed like a formal summons. Time: November 11th. Location: Fort Liberty Parade Field. Attire: Class A uniform. Guests: 2 family members permitted. My cursor hovered over the line that said Gold Star Family Contact Information. I was supposed to enter the names of 2 immediate relatives. For a long time, I didn't type anything. My fingers froze over the keys caught between memory and instinct. I should have left the fields blank. I should have spared myself the inevitable chaos. But I didn't. I typed Martin Reeves and Elaine Reeves because some habits, like hoping for approval, die harder than grief itself. That night, I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice clipped as always, the way people sound when they're rehearsing patience. "Dana," she said. "You remembered how to dial a phone. There's a veterans recognition ceremony next month," I began. "They're inviting Gold Star families. I can list you both if you'd like to come." There was a pause long enough for me to imagine her expression a smile without warmth. "We'll come," she said finally. Then, after a beat, she added, "But please, no tears this time. You embarrassed us last year." The words hit like an echo from another lifetime, the same tone she used when I was a child who dropped ice cream on a Sunday dress. I wanted to say that grief wasn't something you staged, that losing your only child wasn't a photo opportunity, but I didn't. I simply said, "Understood," and ended the call. For the next few weeks, that sentence haunted me. No tears this time. It looped in my head like a warning. I tried to bury it under routine. I threw myself into work evaluations, morning PT, logistics briefings, but every quiet moment seemed to return to that phrase. No tears, no emotion, no mistakes. It wasn't the ceremony I feared. It was the proximity to them, the possibility that even one more encounter could reopen wounds that never healed right. Still, duty had a way of pushing feelings into corners. When the S3 operations office sent a follow-up email confirming the schedule, I downloaded the agenda automatically. Rehearsal on November 8th, final coordination on the 10th, and the live ceremony on Veterans Day morning. Attached was a note: local affiliates of ABC News will broadcast the event live statewide. I froze. Live. I hadn't known about that. For most families, it was an honor. For mine, it was an invitation to perform. My mother would love nothing more than a camera trained on her while she pretended to mourn gracefully for the son she once mocked. I closed the laptop, the screen going dark with my reflection in it, uniform, perfect eyes, tired. The next morning, the phone rang, her voice again. I saw the press notice online, she said without preamble. Finally, something classy. Don't mess this up with emotions. I didn't respond immediately. She filled the silence like she always did. I've already spoken with Father, she continued, and he agrees we should look our best. The families of heroes deserve dignity. Dignity. The word rolled bitter in my mind. They had turned that word into a cage, a mask for cruelty. I'll make sure your names are at the gate, I said, keeping my tone flat. Wonderful, she replied. Oh, and Dana wears something that photographs well under natural light. The last time that shade of blue washed you out. She hung up before I could answer. I sat there with the receiver pressed against my ear, staring at the muted glow of the office light. That was the moment I realized I wasn't nervous about public speaking or ceremony protocol. I was afraid of what their presence would do to me, how it would pull me back into the helpless version of myself that had long since died. The rest of October blurred into routine. Fort Liberty moved in its steady rhythm of drills, formations, and logistics. Leaves turned gold and red across the base. Each morning, I ran the perimeter trail at dawn, the same one Jacob and I had jogged during his visits. The air was cold enough to sting my lungs, but it was the only time of day I felt in control. During one of those runs, Captain Lyle, my friend from Public Affairs, caught up beside me. You saw the memo, he asked between breaths. About the broadcast, I nodded. Yeah, my folks are coming. He grimaced. The same folks from last year. The very same. You sure that's a good idea? No, I said, but I'm doing it anyway. He gave a low whistle. If it helps the camera crews from ABC Fayetteville. Decent people. They'll keep focus on the podium. That's not what I'm worried about. Then what? Everything that isn't the camera. He didn't press. In the Army, we learn when not to ask. Later that week, the rehearsal schedule was posted. I was slotted for a short address right before the closing wreath presentation, a 2-minute speech about service and remembrance. I spent nights polishing every sentence, reading them aloud in my quarters. The words felt sterile at first, too formal, too distant. Eventually, I found the right rhythm, honest, respectful, restrained. The kind of tone my colonel expected, the kind my mother despised. On the evening of October 20th, I sat at my desk staring at Jacob's photo. He was 17 in that picture, standing beside me in front of the base flag, his hair longer than regulations allowed his grin impossible to contain. I whispered the opening line of my speech to him. To serve is not to seek glory. It is to hold the line when no one else will. For a heartbeat, I imagined his voice answering, "You got this, Mom." The next day, my father called. He rarely used the phone unless there was something to gain. "We got the itinerary," he said. "Elaine's already picked out her outfit. You'll make sure we're seated near the front. Yes, optics matter. It's not a gala, Dad. It's a memorial. Everything's optics, Dana. That's what you never understood." I gripped the edge of the desk. "I understand perfectly," I said quietly. "I just don't agree." He laughed, the same dismissive laugh that had followed me since childhood. "You and your defiance. One day, you'll realize emotion doesn't win wars." "Maybe not," I replied, "but it wins hearts." He hung up. For the next few days, my mind replayed the call during briefings and inspections, the voice of a man who'd never once said he was proud of me. That kind of absence leaves its own kind of bruise. Toward the end of October, the base began transforming for Veterans Week. Banners went up, volunteers arranged wreaths, and a new section of the memorial wall was polished to reflect the sunlight. I walked past it every morning, tracing the engraved names until I reached Jacob's. My fingers lingered on the letters. Each one felt like a promise I was still trying to keep. One afternoon, as I was reviewing logistics near the main field, Sergeant Holt approached with a clipboard. "Ma'am, he said the guest list for VIP seating just came in. Your parents confirmed." I nodded. Thank you, Sergeant. He hesitated before speaking again. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Go ahead. Last year's situation. Should we have someone nearby in case there's another scene? His tact was military smooth, but his concern was human. No, I said. They wouldn't dare. Not this time. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that grief age or simple decency would restrain them. But deep down, I knew better. People like my parents didn't change. They simply adjusted their masks. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, counting rotations. 41 years old, a decorated officer, and still bracing for the next emotional ambush. I thought of Jacob again. He'd written me a letter the day before deploying, one I'd memorized but rarely read. Mom, don't let the world harden you. The strong aren't the ones who never cry. They're the ones who keep loving anyway. I folded the letter back into its envelope and tucked it into my pocket folder for the ceremony. It would be my quiet anchor, the reminder that honor didn't belong to those who controlled others, but to those who endured. As the calendar turned to November, the sense of foreboding sharpened. My uniform was pressed and ready. My speech printed the words, measured. On November 8th, we held the rehearsal. The field looked perfect under the morning light. Flags aligned brass-polished rows of chairs gleaming white. The ABC camera crew tested angles while officers reviewed scripts. When it was my turn to step up to the podium, I took a breath and spoke the first line of my speech. My voice carried strong across the field. For a moment, it felt right. Then I saw them. My parents standing near the entrance, having arrived early for once. My mother waved as if it were a social event. My father inspected the seating area with that same disapproving squint. They didn't belong there, not in that sacred rehearsal space, not in that memory I'd fought so hard to keep pure. Afterward, she approached. It looked nice, she said. Try smiling more. You look stiff on camera. I nodded once and walked away before she could say anything else. That night, I wrote an email draft to the event coordinator, almost deleting their names from the guest list. My cursor hovered over the delete key for a full minute. Then I closed the laptop. Some lessons, I told myself, are only learned the hard way. The day before the ceremony, the local paper ran a preview article about the event listing names of families attending. There beneath the photo of the memorial wall was mine, Major Dana Reeves' Gold Star mother, accompanied by Mr. and Mrs. Martin Reeves of Savannah, Georgia. My mother texted within an hour. We saw the article. You look much better in this picture. Finally, something to be proud of. I didn't reply. I went for a run instead, the night air cold enough to bite my skin. By the time I returned, I had made peace with what was coming. I couldn't control them, but I could control myself. If they came to embarrass me, I'd stand taller. If they tried to humiliate me, I'd let the truth speak for itself. What I didn't realize then was that truth, like grief, always finds its moment whether you're ready or not. November 11th was waiting, and with it, the reckoning. I didn't know I'd been preparing for my entire life. Veterans Day dawned crisp and gold, the kind of morning that pretends to promise peace. I arrived at the parade field before sunrise, the dew still thick on the grass, the horizon painted in muted pinks. The base was already stirring. Volunteers carried chairs, soldiers arranged flags, and the color guard rehearsed quietly in the distance. Everything about the morning felt structured, reverent, and precise, the way military ceremonies are meant to be. I checked my watch, 0800, 1 hour until the first families arrived. My uniform fit perfectly, every ribbon and pin aligned by regulation. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. Every detail reminded me who I had become and who they could no longer diminish. Sergeant Holt met me near the podium, clipboard in hand. "Morning, ma'am," he said, offering a small smile. "Everything's squared away. ABC Fayetteville set up over there. You'll go on right before the wreath presentation." "Copy that," I said, scanning the neat rows of folding chairs. "Any word from my guests?" His expression faltered. "They checked in at the gate 15 minutes ago. VIP escort brought them through." "Thank you, Sergeant," I said, forcing my tone even. "Just keep an eye on that section, will you?" "Yes, ma'am." He hesitated, then added softly, "Ma'am, whatever happens today, everyone here respects you. Don't forget that." I nodded, not trusting my voice to reply. By 0100, the field was filled. Families in black coats and medals pinned to their chests, young soldiers standing at parade rest brass glinting under the sun. The air carried the solemn rhythm of marching boots and muted conversation. Then I saw them. My parents. Martin and Elaine Reeves emerging from the crowd as if the ceremony were their red carpet. My father in a dark navy suit, sunglasses hiding whatever passed for emotion. My mother in cream pearls and that signature perfume, sweet and suffocating. They walked with purpose, heads high, expressions polished. Even grief to them had to look expensive. They found their seats in the second row, dead center. When our eyes met, my mother gave a small, calculated smile. My father didn't bother. He adjusted his cufflinks, surveying the field like an investor inspecting property. I exhaled slowly, grounding myself in the sound of the band tuning up. 0930. The ceremony began. The announcer's voice echoed through the speakers low and steady. Welcome to Fort Liberty's Veterans Memorial Recognition Ceremony. Today we gather to honor those who gave everything for freedom. Applause rippled softly. I kept my gaze forward, focusing on the flag at half-mast, letting the words wash over me. The guest speaker, a retired general, spoke about sacrifice, unity, and the price of freedom. His voice was strong but kind, the kind of voice that could steady a crowd. Then came the moment the families dreaded and cherished in equal measure, the reading of names. Each one pronounced slowly, clearly, followed by a pause long enough for hearts to break. Private First Class Jacob Reeves, the announcer said finally. My chest tightened. The air seemed to still. That was my son's name carried on the wind. That was his story, reduced to formality. I stood, heels clicking, posture perfect. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother lean toward my father. She loves this part, she whispered, just loud enough for nearby seats to catch. Sergeant Holt, who stood 3 rows back, glanced sharply at them. Ma'am? He murmured under his breath. Please, not now. My mother's reply was icy. We raised her to have dignity, not to cry for cameras. My jaw locked. The world tilted slightly, a hum building in my ears. The announcer continued, oblivious, each name like a drumbeat. I sat back down, feeling the burn crawl up my throat. Breathe, Dana. Stay composed. You've survived worse. But I hadn't. Not like this. Not in front of the people who had once been my family and the soldiers who looked to me as an example. The chaplain led the invocation next, his words gentle and deliberate. May the memories of our heroes remind us of what love looks like in its purest form. I wanted to believe that, but my mother's scoff under her breath shattered the moment. Pure love doesn't leave a child to die overseas, she murmured. My father chuckled softly, shaking his head. I felt something crack, an old scar splitting open. The announcer's voice returned. Now please welcome Major Dana Reeves' Gold Star mother to share a few words. The title stung and steadied me all at once. I rose, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward the podium. The sun had climbed higher, throwing a glare off the brass railing. The field fell silent. The only sound was the faint rustle of flags and the click of my heels against the stage. As I reached the microphone, my mother leaned slightly toward my father and said, just audibly, "At least now, the pity will make you look important." My fingers tightened around the edge of the podium. For a fraction of a second, I considered turning back, walking away, ending it before it began. But then I thought of Jacob, his laughter, his courage, his final message telling me to stand tall. I adjusted the mic. "Thank you," I began. My voice was steady, though I could feel my pulse in my throat. Today we remember not just names, but lives. My son, Private First Class Jacob Reeves, was 19 when he gave his life protecting others. He believed that service meant showing up for something larger than yourself. I paused. The silence felt heavy, respectful. I scanned the crowd, fellow soldiers, families, friends. Then my eyes landed on my parents. My mother's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. My father leaned back, arms crossed. I continued. Jacob taught me that courage isn't loud. It's quiet. It's in the choices no one sees, the moments no one applauds. I took a breath. And it's in forgiveness, even when it feels impossible. A soft murmur swept the crowd. I thought just maybe I'd made it through. Then my father laughed. a short cutting sound that carried like shrapnel. "Courage runs in the men of this family," he said, clearly voice dripping with sarcasm, not the women. A stunned silence fell. Every head turned. The air thickened. Even the flag seemed to still. The officer sitting beside them shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. My mother gave a delicate shrug, as if to say, "Boys will be boys." My vision tunneled. I could see Sergeant Holt take a half step forward before freezing, unsure if he should intervene. My heart hammered every beat echoing in my ears. I looked at my father, his smirk, his casual cruelty, and for a split second I saw the years of dismissal, of manipulation, of silence demanded and dignity denied. The laughter behind him spread awkwardly, nervous and thin. I wanted to scream. Instead, I lifted my gaze to the flags waving in the wind. Red, white, blue. 3 colors. 3 reminders of what Jacob had believed in. I set down the pages of my speech slowly, my movements deliberate. The microphone caught the faint tremor of paper. I didn't say another word. I simply whispered too softly for the audience, but just loud enough for the man who raised me. "You don't deserve his name." Then I stepped back. For a moment, no one knew what to do. The colonel started to rise uncertain. The cameras hesitated, their lenses trained on the still figure of a uniformed officer choosing silence over spectacle. I turned, descended the steps one by one. My heels clicked against the platform, measured and unwavering. The world blurred around the edges, faces, flags, the faint buzz of whispered confusion. My mother's voice followed, faint and venomous. She always was dramatic. Outside the camera frame, I stopped near the memorial wall. The sunlight reflected off the polished granite, and there, engraved in perfect alignment, was Jacob's name. Private First Class Jacob Reeves. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded letter I'd carried since Kabul. The edges were worn, the ink faint. It was the last thing he wrote before deployment, the letter that had kept me standing for 2 years. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The words swam for a moment, then settled into clarity. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means I'm not coming home. But I need you to know none of this was for nothing. Every day you showed me what strength looks like. Don't ever let anyone tell you it's weakness. Stand tall. Always." I let the letter rest against the cold stone, my gloved fingers brushing his name. Around me, the ceremony continued in the distance, the faint echo of applause for the next speaker, the next family, but I heard nothing. The world had narrowed to a single point, my son's name. The letter, the echo of my father's laughter still hanging in the air behind me. I didn't cry, not there, not in front of cameras or crowds. I had no tears left to give them. Instead, I breathed in deeply, letting the cold air fill my lungs. I turned once toward the stage. My parents sat as if nothing had happened, my mother adjusting her coat, my father whispering to a man beside him. It was then that I understood shame was something they could not feel because it required empathy, and empathy was something they had long abandoned. I walked away from the memorial, my boots pressing into the frost-soft grass. The sound of the band resumed, the anthem swelling behind me. The local news cameras caught the image, an officer in full uniform walking alone past rows of flags, sunlight glinting off her medals. They didn't capture the moment the folded letter slipped from my hand and fell at the base of the wall, landing softly on the grass beside Jacob's name. That image was mine alone. The paper fluttered once in the breeze, then stilled. I kept walking until the music faded, until the crowd became a distant blur. Behind me, my silence spoke louder than anything I could have said. In the end, they got their performance, but not the one they planned. I left them sitting among the rows of families who had lost more than they could bear, still pretending, still posing. The ceremony continued without me, but the story had already shifted. Something in the air had changed, a ripple that no one could unsee. And though I didn't know it then, that moment, the one they thought would humiliate me, would soon become the beginning of their undoing. The ceremony ended hours ago, but the echoes of it still lived in the walls of my quarters. The apartment they gave senior officers at Fort Liberty was small but tidy. 2 rooms, 1 window overlooking the motor pool, 1 mirror that never lied. I sat in full uniform, motionless, the medals still glinting under the muted light of the desk lamp. My gloves lay on the table beside my laptop next to the folded program from the ceremony. The air was heavy, too quiet. I could still hear his laugh, the sharp guttural sound of my father's voice cutting through the moment that was supposed to belong to my son. The applause, the speeches, the silence that followed when everyone realized what had just happened, it all looped in my head like a broken broadcast. I unpinned the silver star clasp from my jacket with careful precision, the metal cool between my fingers. One by one, I removed the ribbons, the insignia, the polished mask I'd built over 20 years. When the last pin clattered softly onto the desk, I finally exhaled. It sounded more like a sob. My laptop blinked awake as if summoned. A new email notification glowed at the corner of the screen. Subject request for comment. Veterans Day incident. I clicked it open already knowing what it was. Major Reeves, the message began, our station would like to request a comment on the incident involving your parents during the Fort Liberty ceremony this morning. We are preparing a segment for the evening news. Please respond by 1600 if you'd like to share your statement. My hand hovered over the keyboard, then froze. I could see my reflection in the dark part of the screen, the tight jaw, the tear tracks I hadn't noticed the uniform stripped of its pride. The humiliation hadn't just been public, it had been surgical. It cut straight to the part of me I'd tried to protect for years, the soldier, the mother, the woman who thought composure could substitute for peace. I closed the laptop slowly and let my palms rest on its lid. My fingers trembled. I wasn't shaking from anger, not yet. It was something deeper, something primal. The kind of tremor that comes before an eruption. I pressed my hands to my face and for the first time in decades let myself cry without apology. The sound was raw, foreign, like something breaking free after years of captivity. I cried for Jacob, for the boy who'd believed in the good of people. I cried for Mark, for the husband who never got to grow old. I even cried for the younger version of myself, the girl who still thought her parents' love was something worth earning. My tears hit the fabric of my uniform, darkening the navy wool. Then the tears turned into something else. Memory. A flashback so vivid it stole the air from my lungs. I was 8 again, standing in the kitchen of our Savannah house, sunlight slanting through the lace curtains. I'd dropped a glass of milk. It had shattered on the floor, spreading white puddles between the shards. My mother's gasp was sharp, theatrical. My father's footsteps followed quick and heavy. "Do you know what this looks like?" he'd shouted. I remember stammering, trying to clean it, saying sorry over and over. Then the slap. It wasn't the pain that stayed with me, it was the look in his eyes. Cold, satisfied, as if he'd just taught me a lesson worth remembering. Crying over spilled milk, he'd said, voice dripping with disgust. "You'll never get respect if you show weakness." That day, I learned to cry quietly behind locked doors into the sleeve of a nightgown so no one would hear. That lesson had lasted 33 years, until today. The past collided with the present like thunder. My chest tightened, my breathing went ragged. Then the tremor subsided, replaced by something steadier, heat, focus, clarity, the kind that doesn't cool down until it finds justice. I stood and crossed the room, pacing like a caged soldier waiting for orders. The uniform on the hanger looked foreign now, too clean, too polite. The clock ticked past 1500. I opened the drawer beside my desk and pulled out the small black USB drive Jacob had mailed home months before his death. I hadn't watched it in almost a year. It was labeled for Mom. Personal. The handwriting was his slanted, youthful, confident. I inserted it into the laptop, the drive blinking red like a heartbeat. The screen came alive with static before stabilizing. Then there he was. Jacob sitting in a dusty tent somewhere in Afghanistan, his face illuminated by the faint glow of a single bulb. He looked tired but smiling. Behind him, the canvas walls rippled with the desert wind. "Hey, Mom," he began, voice light but sincere. "I know you hate when I send these videos, but I guess it helps me think straight out here." He laughed softly. "We had another rough patrol today. One of the new guys froze when we hit fire, and I had to drag him behind the vehicle. You'd have been proud." I remembered your voice yelling, "Check your flank, Reeves." He grinned, shaking his head. "You always said courage isn't about not being scared, it's about doing it anyway." "I get that now." He paused, eyes softening. "If anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll keep standing tall. Not for me, for yourself." Don't let anyone tell you how to carry pain. It's yours, not theirs. The video flickered. He looked away for a moment, then back. You always told me silence can be powerful, but sometimes Mom's silence protects the wrong people. Then the recording ended. I sat there frozen, staring at the screen long after it went black. Silence protects the wrong people. The words carved through me like truth finally finding its mark. I whispered them out loud, testing their weight. Silence protects the wrong people. My reflection in the laptop screen was no longer the same woman who walked off that stage. My eyes were swollen but clear. My voice, when I finally spoke again, was steady. You wanted me silent, Mom, I said quietly, looking toward the mirror. Fine. Let's see how silence looks on camera. The next hour passed in a blur of precision, the kind of clarity that only comes after you've stopped pretending. I stood changed out of my dress uniform and replaced it with the Army combat uniform, the one Jacob used to tease me about saying it made me look too official to hug. I pinned my hair up not for regulation, but for resolve. Every movement felt deliberate. I checked my phone, 27 missed calls, mostly from unknown numbers, a few from my mother. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat back down at the desk and opened a blank document. I titled it, Statement for Broadcast. My fingers hovered for a moment, then began to type. On Veterans Day, during a ceremony meant to honor sacrifice, my parents chose mockery. I have stayed silent my entire life to preserve the illusion of family dignity. Today, that silence ends. My son's legacy deserves better. The families of soldiers deserve better. Dignity doesn't mean pretending. It means telling the truth. I didn't know if I would send it yet. I just knew it needed to exist. Somewhere between grief and fury, something inside me had shifted permanently. I was no longer waiting for them to apologize. I was preparing to show the world what they really were. The sun outside dipped low, painting the base in copper and shadow. I stepped to the window. From here, I could see the flagpole at the memorial field, still half-mast, still fluttering in the evening wind. A few soldiers crossed the lot, laughing quietly, unaware that the woman behind the glass was planning a war of her own, the kind fought with truth instead of bullets. The knock on my door startled me. Sergeant Holt's voice came through cautious. Ma'am? You all right? I opened the door a few inches. I'm fine, Sergeant. He studied me for a moment. You sure that was rough today? I've seen worse, I said. He hesitated, then added, Local news ran a clip. They muted the audio, but it's out there. I nodded. Let them watch. He blinked, not understanding. All right, ma'am. Just checking on you. When he left, I turned back to the laptop. The muted blue glow reflected off the medals still scattered on the desk. I picked one up, the bronze star Jacob had earned posthumously. My thumb traced the engraving. This is what courage looks like, I whispered. Not whatever they showed today. The night deepened. Somewhere outside, a bugle played taps. The notes drifted through the open window, soft, solemn final. I closed my eyes. The sound wrapped around me like a promise. Tomorrow, I decided, would be the first day I lived without their control. Tomorrow, silence would no longer protect the wrong people. When the final note faded, I reached for the lamp and turned it off. The room plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the USB light still blinking red. It pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like a heart learning how to beat again after too long in chains. The next morning, Fort Liberty was still gray from the night's rain. Puddles reflected the flagpoles, the sky heavy with leftover thunder. Inside my quarters, I sat at my desk with coffee gone cold, the laptop open but untouched. The storm outside mirrored the one brewing in me. Grief had burned itself into ash, and what remained was focus. Clear, cold, surgical. I opened my inbox first. There were dozens of new emails, press inquiries, official condolences, and one message flagged from an old local journalist in Savannah. Heard about the Veterans Day scene. Your parents have been vocal. Care to respond? I stared at the word vocal like it was a weapon wrapped in courtesy. I didn't reply. Instead, I clicked the attached screenshot. It was an article from the Savannah Herald, dated the night before. Headline Major's emotional breakdown raises questions about military image. The quote below the title was familiar. Too familiar. Some people confuse public duty with personal drama, said Elaine Reeves, mother of Major Reeves. My throat tightened. The reporter had written Elaine Reeves, prominent member of the Savannah Heritage Guild, expressed concern that televised outbursts from military families can distract from the true meaning of sacrifice. So, I scrolled to the bottom. There was no mention of Jacob, just me reduced to spectacle by the woman who gave me life. It was the same game she'd always played, polished cruelty until it looked respectable. I opened another tab and began searching archives, typing her name. Within minutes, I found more. A letter to the editor from 2021, 2 weeks after Jacob's death. Our family grieves, but we also believe parents should teach responsibility before glorifying service. Signed, Elaine M. Reeves. My hand trembled on the mouse. It wasn't grief anymore. It was rage, sharpened by evidence. I began saving copies, screenshots, PDFs, time-stamped backups. Every insult she'd wrapped in concern, every sentence that turned honor into her stage. Then I opened a separate folder, insurance. It was something I hadn't looked at in years. After Mark's death in 2011, the Army had provided a standard life insurance payout to next of kin. At the time, I'd signed the necessary paperwork while barely functioning. 2 months later, I discovered a secondary claim had been filed in his name through a private insurer. The beneficiary, Martin Reeves. The signature forged. I'd confronted him once years ago, but he denied everything, insisting it was a clerical mix-up. The money had vanished and so had any proof. Or so I'd thought. But I'd learned long ago that the Army never truly deletes records. I logged into my old personnel archive, searching under DFAS, Life Insurance Correspondence 2011. There it was, a scanned copy of the policy document, the date barely legible, and below it a digital signature that didn't match mine nor Mark's. I zoomed in. The slant of the handwriting was identical to my father's. A lifetime of forged dignity right down to ink and deceit. I printed it quietly, the machine's hum steady in the still room. Next came the audio, the one I had tried to erase years ago. I pulled out an old phone from the drawer, a relic with a cracked screen, its battery bloated but functional. I plugged it in, waiting as it flickered back to life. The home screen was cluttered with years of photos. Jacob's smile, old family trips, medals, pinned smiles that had meant survival. I opened the voice memo folder. There it was. Dad, call, Sept, 2011. Wave. I pressed play. His voice filled the room, too clear, too casual. You know, Dana, he said we deserve something for raising a soldier. You wouldn't be here without our sacrifices. It's only fair. My younger self's voice followed, quiet, breaking. He was my husband, Dad, and he was my son-in-law. Martin replied smoothly. You wouldn't even have that insurance if I hadn't made a few calls. I stopped the playback halfway through, the bile rising in my throat. That single line was enough to expose everything. The greed, the manipulation, the endless hunger for control dressed up as parental care. I transferred the file to my current laptop, labeled it Evidence Audio 1. Then I sat back and let the pieces align like coordinates on a map. For the first time, revenge didn't feel like anger, it felt like duty. At 1,000 hours, I called Captain Lyle. His voice crackled through the line, steady as ever. Dana, you okay? Define okay. You've been trending online for 12 hours straight. The base PR team's on standby. I exhaled. Then it's time I take control of the narrative. Meaning, I'm done being quiet. There was a pause. I figured this was coming, he said. You planning to go official or off the record? Neither, I said. I'm going to let them expose themselves. You've got proof. Emails, forged documents, a recorded call. Enough to burn through their reputation twice over. Then I'll say this as your friend, not your PA officer. You can file a defamation complaint and the Army will back you. But once you go public, there's no taking it back. The media won't protect your grief, only your quote. I let the silence stretch. The hum of the ceiling fan filled the gap. I don't need protection, I said finally. I need truth. Then be smart about it, he said. Tell your story before they twist it again. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. There's a Veterans Week interview with ABC Fayetteville on Thursday. Topics Gold Star families. They want me as a guest. You sure you want to step into that spotlight? I've spent my life avoiding it, I said. Now I'm stepping straight into it. You planning to name them? No. I don't have to. He chuckled softly. You always were strategic. You'll make a hell of a statement, Reeves. That's the plan. All right, I'll make sure the media desk clears your appearance. Just watch your 6 major. Always do. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet again, the storm outside fading into drizzle. I opened a new file labeled Operation Honor. Not an official report, just my blueprint. I typed out every point like an officer mapping a mission. 1. Collect all documented evidence, emails, audio, insurance. 2. Verify authentication time-stamped copies, chain of custody. 3. Prepare public statement with controlled emotional tone. 4. Leak select excerpts to journalists sympathetic to veteran causes. 5. Deliver live interview. Thursday, mention principles, not names. 6. Allow truth to expose itself through implication, not accusation. 7. Record the entire process. Transparency is defense. I reread the plan twice, ensuring every step carried intention, not impulse. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about reclaiming agency. My parents had spent decades weaponizing silence, reputation, and shame. I was about to take all 3 and turn them back on them. I pulled up the ABC Fayetteville contact sheet. The host's name was Rachel Gardner, a former Army spouse known for her tact. I drafted a short message, Ms. Gardner. I'd be honored to join your Veterans Week segment. I'd like to speak about integrity, grief, and the quiet battles soldiers fight long after the war ends. I hit send before I could hesitate. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant and approving. The rest of the day became mechanical. I cataloged evidence, labeled folders, scanned old letters. Among them, I found a Christmas card from my parents dated 2018. It read, "We hope you find peace in knowing Jacob will make you proud someday." The ink was too neat, the subtext too cruel. I placed it in the evidence pile, not because it was proof of a crime, but because it captured the essence of their rot, the way they dressed wounds as wisdom. As night settled, I brewed a new pot of coffee and reviewed the ABC segment lineup. It would air live at 1900 hours Thursday, filmed at the local studio 15 minutes off base. The producer had requested a few talking points. I smiled faintly at the irony I'd spent my career following scripts written by others. Now I would write my own. My phone buzzed on the table, a text from an unknown number. "You've embarrassed this family enough. Stop while you can." No name. But I didn't need one. My father's cadence always betrayed him, even in typed words. I screenshot the message, filed it under threats, personal. Then I turned off the phone entirely. I wasn't afraid. Fear had no place left to hide in me. Midnight came quietly. Rain tapped against the glass, steady and rhythmic. I glanced at the wall clock, 23:30. My reflection in the window looked different again. Not broken this time. Purposeful. The kind of look Jacob used to have before heading out on a mission. I whispered into the empty room, "I'm on it, kiddo." Mission accepted. Before bed, I rewatched his video once more, stopping at that same line. Sometimes silence protects the wrong people. The faint smile on his face seemed to say, "You know what to do." I did. The next morning, I would submit a formal media release through Lyle's office, framing it as a conversation on Gold Star ethics and public image. The network would eat it up. My parents would watch. And for the first time in their lives, they would learn what real exposure feels like. As I shut off the light, a thought surfaced, a quiet calm, one that felt almost like peace. My father always said respect was something you commanded. He was wrong. It's something you earn. And by the end of this week, everyone would know the difference. A week later, the sky over Fayetteville was cloudless, the kind of clear blue that looks painted on. The morning air carried that crisp chill of late November, and for the first time in months, I felt calm. Not the calm of peace, but the kind that comes before controlled detonation. The ABC Fayetteville studio was tucked inside a low brick building off Bragg Boulevard. Inside, everything hummed with quiet efficiency lights, cables, technicians adjusting sound levels, the faint buzz of fluorescent bulbs. The show was called Voices of Valor, a weekly talk series that usually featured veterans and their families. Today's segment, Gold Star Families and the Cost of Silence. I was the featured guest. Rachel Gardner, the host, greeted me in the green room with a warmth that wasn't staged. She was a woman in her early 50s, hair streaked with gray eyes that had seen more than most reporters ever admit. "Major Reeves," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy." "Duty rarely is," I replied. She smiled faintly, motioning for me to sit. "We'll start with some light background your service, Jacob's legacy, then we'll move into family support. I'll keep it conversational. You don't have to mention anything you're uncomfortable with." "I'm comfortable with the truth," I said. She studied me for a moment, sensing something underneath the calm. "Good," she said quietly. "The truth tends to travel fast." The producer gave a 5-minute warning. The studio lights dimmed, cameras adjusted, makeup artists gave last-minute touch-ups. I sat in the guest chair across from Rachel, the table between us. Spotless, a small American flag pin gleaming on her lapel. The red light on the camera blinked. "We're live in 3, 2, 1. The intro music faded. Rachel's voice took on that measured tone of practiced empathy. "Good evening and welcome to Voices of Valor. I'm Rachel Gardner. Tonight we're joined by Major Dana Reeves, a decorated officer and Gold Star mother whose story has recently gained national attention. Major Reeves, thank you for your service and for being here." "Thank you for having me," I said evenly. My hands rested on the table, still as stone. "Major Reeves," Rachel began, "you've served over 2 decades in uniform. You've led soldiers, trained leaders, and endured personal loss. But what stands out most about your story is resilience. When people think of family support, especially for those in the military, they often imagine unity and strength. What does that term mean to you?" Family support, I looked straight into the camera lens. For a heartbeat, I saw my own reflection, calm, poised, unflinching. Then I said it. Sometimes I began my voice steady. Family is the enemy behind the front line. The studio went still. Even the technicians froze. Rachel blinked but didn't interrupt. I continued. "We talk about sacrifice in uniforms, but there's another kind of sacrifice we don't name: the emotional cost of being raised by people who care more about reputation than compassion. Sometimes the hardest battle isn't fought overseas. It's fought at the dinner table." Rachel exhaled softly. "That's a powerful statement," she said. "Are you referring to something specific?" "Yes," I said. "The past week." I reached into the small envelope I'd brought and handed her a flash drive. "What you're about to see was filmed during the Veterans Day ceremony at Fort Liberty. It wasn't broadcast. A colleague recorded it from the audience." She glanced at the producer. "Roll it." The screen behind us flickered to life. The footage played silently at first, a handheld view of the ceremony. Flags waving, rows of chairs, my speech at the podium. Then the moment came, my father's laugh, his voice audible even through the crowd. "Courage runs in the men of this family, not the women." Gasps rippled through the live studio audience. Rachel's eyes widened. The clip continued, capturing my mother's expression, unbothered, even amused. Then, the video cut to me walking off stage, the folded letter slipping from my hand at the memorial wall. The room was silent when the screen faded to black. Rachel looked at me, visibly shaken. "That was difficult to watch," she said quietly. "How did it feel in that moment to stand there, like I'd been drafted into a war?" "I never agreed to fight," I said. "But unlike the others, this one had no rules of engagement." She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. "You've chosen to show this footage publicly. Why now?" "Because silence has a cost," I said, "and I've paid it my entire life." I leaned forward slightly, voice low but unbreakable. "When we stay quiet to protect appearances, we become accomplices to cruelty. I spent years thinking dignity meant restraint. But real dignity is truth." Rachel nodded, clearly moved. "You're not naming anyone directly, but the message is clear. Do you worry about repercussions?" "No," I said simply. "You can't punish someone who's already lived through shame. The truth's lighter than lies once you carry it long enough." The producer signaled we had 3 minutes left. Rachel adjusted her notes but didn't look down. If you could say one thing to other Gold Star families watching this, what would it be? I turned to the camera again. Don't let anyone rewrite your pain. Some people care more about image than sacrifice. But honor isn't for sale. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Rachel said softly, "That may be the most honest thing I've heard on this show." The red light went off. "And we're clear," the producer called. The room exhaled as one. Rachel leaned over the table, lowering her voice. "You know this will go viral, right?" "That's not my concern," I said. "Good," she replied. "Then let it." She clasped my hand. "You just gave voice to a lot of people who never got the chance." By the time I left the studio, the clip was already circulating online. Within an hour, the hashtag appeared, #StandTallDana. By nightfall, #Honor Jacob joined it. Veterans, spouses, and families across the country began sharing the video, adding their own stories. Parents who belittled their service spouses, who dismissed their trauma communities that only clapped for sacrifice when it looked clean. My inbox flooded. Thousands of messages. "You said what we all feel." Finally, someone spoke the truth. "I stood tall today because of you." ABC uploaded the full segment by midnight. By the next morning, it had 3 million views. The comments poured in faster than they could moderate. "I served with her son," one post read. "He saved 2 of us that day in Kabul." The apple didn't fall far. Another family doesn't always mean blood. Sometimes it's the ones who show up when the world turns away. By the 48-hour mark, the clip was everywhere. CNN, Fox, MSNBC military forums, Facebook veteran groups, even TikTok edits with soldiers saluting to the line, "Honor isn't for sale." My words had escaped me and found their own rhythm. The Army Public Affairs Office released a brief statement. Major Dana Reeves has served with honor and integrity for over 2 decades. The Army fully supports her right to speak about the realities faced by Gold Star families. That single paragraph silenced any whisper that my actions were out of line. It also ignited the next phase of chaos. My parents' phone numbers leaked online within hours. The same Savannah paper that had quoted my mother now published a follow-up. Elaine and Martin Reeves declined to comment. Their neighbors gave interviews. They always seemed concerned about appearances, one said. Never much warmth there. The Heritage Guild quietly removed Elaine's name from its board roster. Within a day, the real estate firm my father consulted for suspended his profile. Reputation, once their temple was crumbling, brick by brick. Meanwhile, my phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters, fellow officers, old friends. Even a senator's aide called asking if I'd testify at a Veterans Committee hearing about family neglect and post-service trauma. I declined for now. It wasn't about politics. It was about truth-finding air. Lyle stopped by my office that afternoon, grin-wide voice half disbelief. "You blew up the internet, Major." "That wasn't my intent. Intent doesn't matter when the message is this clean," he said. "You didn't attack anyone. You just told the truth on camera. That's lethal." "It wasn't meant to be lethal." "Oh, it was," he said, half joking, half awed. "And the best part? They did the rest themselves. The world saw what kind of people mock a mother at her son's memorial." I didn't smile, but I felt something close to relief. Not triumph, just release. The story had left my hands, and I no longer had to carry it alone. That night, I sat by the window again, the glow from my laptop lighting the room. I watched the comments scroll endlessly, people from small towns, cities, bases across the country. Strangers writing as if they'd known Jacob, as if they'd stood beside me that day. Maybe they had in their own way. One message stood out. It was from a retired sergeant major. "I lost my boy in Iraq. My wife left. My church stopped calling. But tonight, I showed your clip to my platoon photo and told him someone finally said it. Thank you, Major." I closed the laptop and stared out at the moonlit base. The flag still waved on the hill. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt honest. 2 days later, a reporter called from NBC National asking for a follow-up. "Major Reeves, would you be willing to appear on the morning brief to discuss how families can better support service members?" I declined politely. "The story's already told," I said. "I don't need more airtime." But that wasn't entirely true. I didn't need airtime. I needed closure. And closure doesn't come from headlines, it comes from consequence. My parents tried to reach me 3 times that week. I didn't answer. They left voicemails, my father defensive, my mother trembling with indignation. "You've humiliated us nationwide," she said in one message. "Do you realize what you've done to this family?" I replayed it once, then deleted it. The irony was almost poetic. For years, they taught me that silence equaled dignity. Now silence was their punishment. On the 7th night after the broadcast, I walked to the memorial again. The air was cold, the grass stiff with frost. I carried nothing. This time, no speech, no letter. Just myself. The field was empty except for the rows of flags and the sound of crickets. I stopped at Jacob's name, tracing it again with my fingers. "It's done," I whispered. "They can't touch us anymore." The wind picked up gentle but sure. Somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of taps drifted from the barracks. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. The melody was soft, almost forgiving. The world had seen the truth. The facade was gone. And in that silence, I understood something Jacob had always known. Sometimes the bravest act isn't fighting back. It's standing tall while the world watches your enemies destroy themselves. That week, America saw my parents for who they really were. And I saw myself finally for who I had become. Not the daughter who bowed her head to keep the peace, but the woman who looked straight into a camera and turned humiliation into justice. The explosion had been controlled precise and devastatingly effective. The war was over. The battlefield was quiet. But the echo, it would last forever. The storm hit slowly, not in thunder, but in whispers. Within 48 hours of the broadcast, the Reeves name had turned from a Savannah fixture to a cautionary headline. Reporters dug up everything. Articles, photographs, charity gala records, even footage from old society events where my parents had smiled beside officials and bankers. Each image looked different now, reframed by the truth. Comment sections filled with words like cold, cruel, performative. The Savannah Herald, the same paper that once printed my mother's letters, ran a new piece titled "When Prestige Turns Poison, the Reeves Scandal." My phone didn't stop ringing. The first few calls were from unknown numbers, producers, reporters, talk show assistants offering exclusive interviews. I ignored them all. Then came the familiar ones. My mother called first, 6 times in one morning, then 8 more before noon. I didn't pick up. The voicemail icon blinked red, insistent. I played one message only because I needed to hear how guilt sounded in her voice. "Dana," she began, her tone brittle. "Please answer. You've made a terrible mistake. People are talking. The Guild is questioning me and your father. Well, he's furious. You need to fix this. Issue a statement. Tell them you misspoke." She inhaled sharply, the sound of someone trying to keep control. "You can't undo 40 years of reputation with one impulsive act. You're a Reeves. Act like it." I deleted it. The next one came 2 hours later, softer. "Dana, sweetheart, the reporters won't leave the driveway. The neighbors stare when I get the mail. You have to understand how this looks." There it was again, their truest fear. Not shame for what they'd done, but humiliation for being caught. That evening, my father sent an email. Subject, "What have you done?" "You humiliated us on national TV. Your mother hasn't eaten in 2 days. People are treating us like criminals. Do you realize what you've done to this family?" I typed for a long time before sending just one line. "Now you know how it feels." The silence afterward was its own kind of music. Within a week, Savannah society had turned on them completely. The Heritage Guild issued a statement thanking Mrs. Reeves for her years of service while announcing her voluntary resignation. It was the politest form of exile. The bank, my father once advised, removed his portrait from its board hallway. A neighbor was quoted on local news saying they were always about appearances. I don't think we ever saw them smile unless a camera was around. I didn't rejoice. I didn't even smile. There was no satisfaction in watching a collapse you'd already survived emotionally decades earlier. It was just gravity finally catching up. Meanwhile, the Army made its move. Colonel Park from Public Affairs stopped by my office with a gentle knock. Dana commands recommending you take 2 weeks off. Let the press cool down. I nodded. Voluntary, technically. I smiled faintly. Then I'll take it. She placed a folder on my desk. For what it's worth, headquarters is proud of you. You handled it with more dignity than most could. Dignity, I repeated quietly. Funny how that word changes meaning, isn't it? She smiled sadly. It does. I spent the next day signing out. Officially, it was temporary personal leave, but everyone knew it was protection from the press, from noise from the machine that devours headlines until it finds another meal. That night, I packed a small bag and drove north toward Virginia. The highway was nearly empty. November trees blurred past the window bare and skeletal, their branches stretching like memories that refused to die. Arlington National Cemetery waited under a pale dawn sky. The white rows of headstones stretched farther than the eye could see, each one a story, each one an echo. I parked near Section 60, the one reserved for the most recent fallen. The air was sharp clean, unflinchingly honest. Jacob's grave was easy to find. I'd memorized the coordinates the day he was buried. Plot 45D102. The grass there was trimmed the stone bright from the previous night's frost. I stood for a long moment before kneeling, the chill seeping through my uniform trousers. The headstone read, PFC Jacob Reeves, United States Army, AUG 7, 2003, AUG 26, 2021, beloved son. I brushed away the small leaves that had gathered at its base. My fingers lingered over the engraved letters. They said you'd be proud, I whispered. I hope they were right. From my pocket, I pulled the old letter, creased softened by years of handling. The paper was fragile now, the ink faded at the edges. I read it again, even though I knew every word. Mom, if you're reading this, promise me you'll keep standing tall. You told me to stand tall, I said aloud, voice catching in the cold air. I did. The tears came quietly without resistance. They weren't the violent sobs of grief anymore. They were something gentler, something that felt like release. Behind me, 2 soldiers passed silently, each nodding respectfully. One of them paused and said softly, Ma'am, I saw your interview. Thank you. I nodded back, unable to speak. For a long while, I stayed kneeling there. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the faint sound of distant bells. I could smell the wet earth, the faint metallic scent of the nearby wreaths, the mix of sorrow and peace that only sacred ground can hold. When I finally rose, I placed the folded letter at the base of the headstone, tucking it beneath the small American flag planted there. That one's yours, I whispered. Mission accomplished. The drive back to North Carolina was quiet. No music, no radio, just the hum of the tires and the echo of his voice in my memory. 2 days later, I received a text from Lyle. You've started something, Reeves. Gold Star organizations are quoting your line everywhere. Congress is drafting a statement about family conduct codes. You changed the conversation. I stared at the screen, then typed back. Good. Maybe something decent will grow from all this noise. That evening, my mother called again. I let it ring out, then listened to the voicemail. Her tone was no longer commanding. It trembled. Dana, please. They won't stop calling. The church board asked us not to attend Sunday service for a while. I just need to hear your voice. We made mistakes, but this is unbearable. For the first time, I felt something other than anger. Not pity, not forgiveness. Just distance, like she was speaking from another planet. I didn't delete that message. I just let it sit there unread but not erased, the same way ghosts linger in houses no one visits. Over the next week, reporters began camping outside their Savannah home. Photos surfaced, my father snapping at photographers, my mother shielding her face behind a newspaper. One network captured footage of him shouting, "We're the victims here!" The internet responded within hours. One comment read, "Victims don't mock their children's funerals." Another, "Some people can't handle the reflection once the mask cracks." I didn't watch any more coverage after that. Instead, I spent my leave days walking the coastal trail near Wilmington. The sea air cut through the fog in my head. The rhythm of waves replaced the noise of headlines. I watched pelicans skim the water, their effortless grace mocking how heavy I had let everything become. One afternoon, I sat on the sand with my boots off, feeling the cold Atlantic press against my toes. For the first time in decades, I wasn't a daughter, a soldier, or a symbol. I was just a person breathing. The guilt for feeling peace was strange at first. It felt like betrayal, as if surviving meant abandoning Jacob. But slowly, I realized peace wasn't forgetting, it was remembering without bleeding. When my 2-week leave ended, I returned to base. Colonel Park met me at the gate with a nod. "Welcome back, Major. You look lighter." "Maybe I finally set something down," I said. "The world's moved on to the next scandal." "You're clear." I smiled faintly. "Good. Though for what it's worth," she added, "your story changed a lot of minds. Command's reviewing its family outreach protocols. You might have done more for this army in 2 minutes on camera than most do in 20 years. "That was never the goal," I said. "Maybe not," she replied, "but it's the result." That night, I unpacked the small bag I'd taken to Arlington. Inside, the only thing I kept was a single envelope with Jacob's handwriting. I placed it on the desk beside his folded flag. The rest Uniforms Awards press clippings stayed in the closet. I stood at the window again, watching the floodlights sweep across the motor pool. Somewhere, a bugle played retreat, marking the end of the day. I closed my eyes and whispered, "It's done." My parents' world had collapsed under its own weight, and I no longer needed to push. Justice, when it comes naturally, doesn't roar. It settles. The last thing I did before bed was write one line in my journal, a habit I'd borrowed from Jacob. Peace doesn't mean the storm is gone. It means I can stand in it without bowing anymore. Then I turned off the light. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, and for the first time since Kabul, I slept through the night. February 2024 arrived sharp and cold, the kind of Carolina winter that bites at the bone without snow to soften it. Fort Liberty looked the same as ever, flags rippling in the wind, formation drills echoing across the parade field, life moving forward as if nothing had changed. But everything had. My story had faded from national headlines, replaced by fresher outrage, newer tragedies. Yet beneath the quiet consequences still bloomed. They always do. The first sign came in an email from Lyle. The subject line read simply, "FYI Bank Inquiry." The message was short. "Federal investigators are reopening the Reeves life insurance file from 2011. Something about irregular beneficiary claims. Just a heads up." I stared at the screen for a long moment before exhaling. The past never stays buried, it just waits for its turn. 2 weeks later, they came. I was leaving the admin building when I saw a familiar sedan parked near the visitor checkpoint. Out stepped my parents, or what was left of them. They looked smaller somehow, like the years had suddenly caught up all at once. My father's suit hung loose on his frame, his once steady gait reduced to a slow shuffle. My mother, always immaculately dressed, wore an overcoat too big for her, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness. For a moment, I thought about walking past them, pretending not to see. But they saw me first. Dana, my mother, called voice cracking. The sound froze me in place, not out of affection, but out of memory. That tone used to precede lectures about posture diction appearances. Now it carried desperation. I turned slowly, hands clasped behind my back, the automatic stance of an officer who refuses to be rattled. They approached across the pavement. My father's jaw clenched. My mother's eyes glistened. She reached for me first, but stopped when she saw the look in mine. "What are you doing here?" I asked, voice level, almost polite. "We needed to see you," my father said. "We didn't know who else to turn to." I let out a small, humorless laugh. "You must be running out of mirrors, then." He ignored the jab, straightening his shoulders like the old businessman he used to be. "The bank's launched an investigation. They're accusing us of fraud, over Mark's policy." My pulse didn't quicken. I'd been waiting for this storm for over a decade. "Accusing," I said softly, "or proving." My mother winced. "Please, Dana. They're saying your father forged signatures. They've frozen our accounts. The lawyers—" Her voice cracked again. "The lawyers are demanding statements. We just need your help clarifying what happened." I tilted my head. "Clarifying," I repeated. "You mean lying for you?" "No," she blurted. "Not lying. Just explaining." You know how the paperwork was back then. It was chaos after Mark's death. So much confusion. There was no confusion, I cut in. My tone was calm but edged with steel. I saw the documents. The digital signature didn't match. The call recording exists. You both knew what you were doing. My father's face reddened. We did what any family would do, he snapped. We made sure something came back to us after everything you cost us. Everything I cost you, I took a slow step forward, the distance between us shrinking to a single breath. Mark died in uniform. Jacob died saving others, and you still think the debt runs to you? He looked away first. My mother reached out again, her hands trembling. Dana, please. We've lost everything. The guild, the bank, our friends. You didn't lose them, I said. You traded them for image, and now the image is gone. She began to cry quietly at first, then harder shoulders shaking. We just wanted control, she said between gasps. We didn't want this shame. The air around us felt frozen. Soldiers passed at a distance, their curious glances flicking toward the scene. I stood perfectly still, my voice soft but cutting. Control is a funny thing, I said. You lose it the second the truth comes out. My father took a step closer, lowering his voice. You don't understand what they're threatening us with. Jail time. Financial ruin. We're old Dana. We can't fight this. You should have thought of that before you cashed in on a dead man's uniform, I said evenly. His composure broke. You're our daughter, he said, almost pleading. We may have made mistakes, but you can't abandon us. I looked him dead in the eye. You abandoned me a long time ago. I just finally stopped waiting for you to notice. He inhaled sharply like the words had struck him physically. My mother, still crying, dropped to her knees right there on the pavement. Please, she whispered. I'll do anything. I just want this to stop. Tell them you misunderstood the papers. Tell them it was an accident. I'll beg if I have to. For a brief moment, something inside me trembled. Not pity, not affection, just the ghost of old conditioning. The instinct to kneel beside her to comfort, to make it stop. But then I remembered every silence they'd demanded, every humiliation they'd dressed as discipline, every moment they turned love into leverage. I straightened instead. You said emotions made me weak, I said quietly. Guess you were wrong. Her sobs deepened. My father looked around, panic flickering across his face as two military police officers strolled past the gate. They saluted me. Ma'am, one said with a nod. I returned it automatically. The officers kept walking, oblivious to the drama at their backs. I turned back to my parents. You should leave, I said. Visitors aren't allowed past the checkpoint without clearance. Dana, please, my mother begged. If you don't help us, we'll lose the house. We'll lose everything. Then you'll finally understand what losing really means. I took a slow breath, my voice softening only slightly. I lost a husband. I lost a son. And I stood back up. You can survive losing reputation. We didn't mean to hurt you, she said, still on her knees. We were scared. You were greedy, I corrected. Scared people seek help. Greedy people seek control. My father grabbed her arm, trying to pull her up, but she stayed kneeling. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I stepped back. I don't need sorry, I said. I needed honesty. You missed your chance. He glared up at me. You think you're so righteous now? You think destroying your own family makes you noble? No, I said simply. It makes me free. The words hung between us cold and final. My father's expression hardened again, his pride, that last brittle armor still refusing to break. You'll regret this, he said. Family is family. No, I said, turning away. Family is who stands beside you when the world falls apart. You made your choice a long time ago. I started walking toward the admin building. Behind me, I could still hear my mother sobbing softly, her voice thin against the wind. Dana, please don't walk away again. I didn't stop. I didn't turn. The MPs were coming back around the corner, their boots crunching against the gravel. One nodded at me again. I returned the salute. When they passed, I glanced back one last time. My parents were standing now, him holding her by the arm, her head bowed, the illusion of superiority gone entirely. They looked like ghosts wandering a battlefield long after the fight ended. As I crossed the threshold back into the base, I realized the irony. They had built their entire lives around appearances, and now they couldn't even face their reflection. That evening, I received another email, this time from a federal liaison. Subject: confirmation of interview. The message explained that my parents were under official review for insurance fraud and wire misrepresentation. The bank had confirmed multiple false claims, and federal prosecutors were considering charges. I read it once, closed the laptop, and sat in silence. There was no victory in it, only completion. A few days later, a letter arrived. Handwritten, no return address, but the handwriting was my mother's. The ink wavered in places where her hand must have trembled. Dana, I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know that we did love you in our way. We were proud, and pride is a disease. It took everything from us. Please remember that your strength came from somewhere. It came from surviving us. I hope you find peace, even if it's without us. I folded the letter and placed it in the same box that held Jacob's last note. The two pieces of paper sat there together. Two ghosts, two legacies, both finally still. The following week, Fort Liberty's winter training resumed. I returned to my unit. Crisp uniform, pressed boots, shined every movement deliberate. But something inside me had shifted. The weight was gone. One morning, while walking across the motor pool, I caught sight of a young lieutenant wiping tears near the flagpole. She quickly stood at attention when she saw me. "Sorry, ma'am," she said. "Just lost my mom last week. I thought I'd be okay by now." I looked at her for a long moment. "You don't have to be okay," I said. "You just have to keep standing." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Yes, ma'am." As I walked away, I realized that maybe in some strange, painful way, I'd finally broken the chain. My parents had taught me everything about control, and Jacob had taught me everything about courage. But only now did I understand the difference. I never heard from them again after that day. The investigation closed quietly by April with plea deals and probation. Their names faded from the news, replaced by others who'd fallen to the same disease of image and greed. Sometimes I wondered if they ever forgave me. Then I realized it didn't matter. Forgiveness wasn't my duty, it was theirs. My duty was truth, and I'd already delivered it. That spring, when the magnolias began to bloom along the base fence, I stood outside my quarters watching the petals fall like snow. For the first time in years, I felt something simple, freedom not from them, but from needing anything they could no longer give. They had come begging for mercy, and I had given them honesty instead. Cold, clean, final. That was my mercy. By early summer 2024, Fort Liberty felt smaller. Not physically, but spiritually, like I'd outgrown its noise, its routine, its constant rhythm of duty and salutes and unspoken stories. 2 decades of service had taught me how to endure anything except stillness. And now, that stillness was all I wanted. I filed my request for extended leave on a quiet Monday morning. The paperwork was simple boxes, checked signatures, written a formality more than a farewell. Colonel Park signed without hesitation. "You've earned it," she said. "Any plans?" "Just air," I replied. She smiled. "Then I hope you find it." A week later, I packed my life into 2 duffel bags and drove east toward Wilmington, North Carolina. The highway stretched straight and endless, lined with pine trees and memories I didn't ask for. I didn't play music. I didn't need to. The hum of the engine and the sound of wind through the cracked window felt like a hymn. Wilmington was quieter than I remembered. A coastal town of fishermen, retired sailors, and weather-worn houses that leaned with dignity toward the sea. I rented a small cottage near Wrightsville Beach, white walls, 1 bedroom, salt-streaked windows. Nothing fancy, just enough to breathe. The first morning there, I woke before sunrise. The air was heavy with mist, the kind that blurs the line between sea and sky. I laced my running shoes, slipped Jacob's folded letter into my pocket, and stepped outside. The sand was cold under my feet, the world gray-blue and motionless. I started to run. Not for distance, not for time, just movement. The waves broke beside me, steady and indifferent. Every breath tasted of salt and memory. I ran until my lungs burned, until I could almost hear his voice beside me. "Come on, Mom, one more mile." When I stopped, I stood by the waterline chest heaving. I pulled the letter from my pocket and read the last line again, the ink now soft from years of touch. "Keep standing tall." I smiled not sadly this time, but with something closer to peace. "Still standing, kiddo," I whispered. "You can rest now." The days began to find rhythm. Morning runs, coffee on the porch, reading Jacob's letters when the sun hit the window just right. Sometimes I'd hear seagulls crying over the surf and think they sounded like echoes of the bass loudspeaker at dawn. Old habits never really die, they just fade into softer ghosts. A month after moving, I got a visit. Sergeant Holt, one of my oldest comrades, arrived unannounced, his truck rumbling up the narrow coastal road. I saw him through the screen door, standing there with that same mix of posture and unease soldiers have when they leave uniformed ground. "Permission to approach," he joked. "At ease, Sergeant," I said, smiling as I opened the door. He carried a small paper bag that smelled like barbecue. "Didn't think you'd let me in without a peace offering." "You assumed right," I said, taking it. We sat on the porch, the sound of waves punctuating our silence. He looked out toward the horizon. "Nice view. Beats the motor pool." "Everything beats the motor pool," I said. He chuckled, then his tone softened. "You disappeared on us, ma'am. One day you were trending across the country. Next thing we knew, you were gone." "I didn't disappear," I said. "I just stopped performing." He nodded. "Still, the guys talk about you. A lot. You started something major. You gave voice to a lot of people who didn't know they were allowed to speak." I didn't answer right away. The wind caught my hair, the scent of salt filling the quiet between us. "He gave me courage," I said finally. "I just returned the favor." Holt looked down at his hands. "The way you handled it, the world saw dignity. But those of us who know, we saw fire." "Fire burns clean," I said. "Eventually." He smiled faintly. "You think you'll ever come back to the Army, I mean?" I thought about it. The drills, the endless reports, the order that made chaos bearable. Maybe I said, but not yet. I still owe myself a few years of peace. "You've earned it," he said, standing. He paused before leaving. "If you ever want to start something bigger, a foundation, a mentorship for Gold Star families, people would follow you. You know that, right?" Maybe I said again. "But for now, I'm just learning how to live without armor." He nodded, saluted lightly, and left the porch without another word. His truck disappeared down the road, leaving only the sound of the waves and a faint smell of barbecue. The next few weeks unfolded in quiet detail. I planted herbs outside the window. I mended a tear in Jacob's old flag that I kept framed. I watched thunderstorms roll in from the Atlantic, the lightning painting silver veins across the clouds. For the first time in decades, I had nowhere to be and no one to prove myself to. It felt strange at first, like stepping out of formation and realizing you can breathe without instruction. One evening, I took a walk along the pier. The boardwalk lights flickered gulls circling overhead. A boy was flying a small red kite, his father holding the spool beside him. The boy shouted with laughter every time the wind caught the kite higher. I stopped to watch a smile tugging at my lips. For a fleeting moment, I saw Jacob there, 7 years old, hair sun-bleached, shouting, "Higher, Mom, higher." I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me until the memory softened. The father noticed me watching and smiled politely. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" "Yes," I said. "Perfect wind for letting go." When I got home, I opened the small box where I kept all the letters and mementos. At the bottom lay the photo, the one I'd avoided for years. It was from my wedding day mark in uniform, me in dress blues, my parents on either side, smiling for the camera. The picture looked like a lie now, but it was still a piece of truth, what we'd all pretended to be. I dusted the frame, then hung it on the wall above the mantel. But I turned it backward, the image facing the plaster. Only the plain wooden backing showed. It wasn't bitterness, it was boundary. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the surf whispering through the dark. The moonlight traced thin lines on the floorboards. I thought about the word forgiveness. It had followed me like a shadow for years, something people said to sound noble, something the church insisted on, something that always felt like surrender. But sitting there in that quiet house by the sea, I finally understood it differently. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It isn't pretending it never happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It's remembering without letting it own you. It's standing tall in the ruins and saying, "You don't get to live here anymore." I whispered it aloud, testing the weight of it. It didn't sound angry. It sounded free. The days stretched into weeks. I found a part-time job at a local veterans outreach center, mostly counseling, sometimes just listening. People came in broken by grief-guilt bureaucracy. I didn't fix them. I just gave them space to speak without shame. Some recognized me from the broadcast months earlier. A few cried when they met me. I never knew what to say to that except, "You're not alone." One afternoon, a woman about my age came in. Her husband had taken his own life after deployment. She'd been blamed by his parents, shunned by their church. She sat in front of me, eyes hollow, hands twisting in her lap. "They said I should have seen the signs," she whispered. "They said I drove him to it." I looked at her and saw a reflection of myself years ago, drowning under other people's narratives. "You didn't cause his pain," I said gently. "You just shared its address. That's not guilt. It's grief." She started crying quietly at first, then harder. When she finally looked up, she asked, "How did you get through it?" I thought for a long moment before answering. By realizing the storm wasn't mine to control, just to survive. She nodded slowly. "Did you forgive them?" "Eventually," I said, "but not for them. For me." That evening, I wrote in my journal again. Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the absence of permission for that pain to rule you. Summer turned to fall. The sea changed color, darker now, rougher. Migrating birds traced patterns overhead, perfect formations that dissolved and reformed without hesitation. I often watched them from the porch, marveling at how instinctively they knew when to move on. On the last warm evening of September, I walked barefoot to the shore with Jacob's folded flag. I didn't unfold it. I just held it to my chest, eyes on the horizon. The sunset painted the water gold and crimson, the colors of endings and beginnings. "You gave me courage," I said softly. "I tried to use it well." The wind lifted, carrying the faint smell of salt and pine. I stood there until the sky went dark. Then I turned and walked home, each step light, deliberate, steady. The next morning, I hung my uniform in the closet for the last time. The medals gleamed faintly in the dawn light. They didn't feel heavy anymore. They just felt earned. Wilmington remained quiet, the world smaller but kinder. I wasn't Major Reeves there. I was just Dana, the woman who once survived war on every front and chose peace without apology. And that, I decided, was enough. May 2024 arrived with the kind of early summer heat that makes the marble steps of Washington, D.C. shimmer like glass. The invitation had come weeks earlier, an embossed envelope with the Pentagon seal and a single line inside. The Department of Defense cordially invites Major Dana Reeves to accept the Gold Star Integrity Award for exemplary courage in service and advocacy. I had read it twice before setting it down beside Jacob's photo. He would have laughed. He'd have said, "You finally made the news for the right reason, Mom." The ceremony was held in the Hall of Heroes, that solemn chamber beneath the Pentagon where silence feels earned. The walls carried the names of men and women who had given everything, carved deep into the stone. Rows of flags framed the stage, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and at the center, the stars and stripes hung still, as if even the air refused to breathe too loudly. The audience wasn't large, but it was the kind that mattered: generals, senators, veterans, and the quiet families who had survived what uniforms alone could not protect them from. I stood near the back, at first, hands, folded eyes tracing the gold inlays on the walls. Every name was a story I didn't know, but somehow understood. When my name was called, I walked to the stage, slowly, deliberately. The medal itself was simple. No diamonds, no flash, just a bronze star suspended from a deep blue ribbon. The Secretary of Defense smiled as she pinned it to my uniform. "For courage, both in and beyond the battlefield," she said. "And for reminding this nation that integrity begins at home." The applause was quiet, the respectful kind that doesn't break reverence. Afterward, NBC's news crew caught up with me outside near the reflecting pool. The interviewer, a composed woman in her 40s, adjusted her earpiece as the camera light flicked on. Major Reeves, she began, the entire country saw your story last year. Many people called it an awakening, a reminder that service sometimes means standing alone. Today you received the Pentagon's highest civilian Gold Star honor. How does it feel? I looked past her to the water where sunlight scattered into shards. Strange, I said softly. To be honored for something that nearly broke me. Do you believe the public response helped you heal? She asked. It helped me see that pain shared becomes purpose, I said. And purpose, that's what keeps us upright. She hesitated, then leaned in slightly. If you could say one thing to parents who disowned their children for serving, what would it be? I met the camera lens directly, the red light blinking like a heartbeat. My voice didn't tremble. If love depends on obedience, I said, it's not love. It's control. The words hung in the air for a moment longer than normal broadcast silence allows. Even the interviewer blinked slowly like she needed a second to process it. Then she nodded. Thank you, Major Reeves. The segment aired that evening on NBC Nightly News. By morning, it was everywhere clipped, quoted, replayed across social media feeds and veteran forums. The phrase, if love depends on obedience, it's not love, it's control, trended on Twitter under #Reeves Doctrine. Gold Star groups reposted it, military spouses printed it on banners, and talk shows debated its meaning. The Veterans Chronicle called it the quote that redefined patriotism in the home. Letters began to arrive at my Wilmington cottage by the dozens. Some typed, others handwritten in shaky cursive. A retired Marine wrote, "You said what many of us could never say to our families." A mother from Kansas wrote, "I disowned my son for joining. After hearing you, I called him. We talked for the first time in 3 years. Even the Army issued an official statement of appreciation, recognizing my commitment to truth, integrity, and healing within the military family structure. None of it felt like fame. It felt like closure that had learned to speak." The Wilmington Veterans Center held a small watch party when the broadcast re-aired that weekend. The volunteers had brought cupcakes with Gold Star frosting, and someone had stuck a small American flag in each one. I stood quietly in the back, a cup of coffee in hand, while the others clapped at the final line. When the segment ended, the room fell into that special hush reserved for shared emotion. A young Marine corporal turned around, eyes wet, and said, "Ma'am, my mom hasn't spoken to me since boot camp, but tonight she texted me. She said she was proud." I smiled. "That's your medal, not mine." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. You earned it for all of us." Later that night, when everyone had gone home, I walked outside to the beach. The wind was cool and steady, the stars sharp against the dark sky. I stood there for a long time, staring at the horizon, listening to the sound of waves colliding softly like applause from the earth itself. For years, silence had been my prison. Now it was my salute. They laughed once at a memorial, at a uniform, at a woman who refused to fit the image they built for her. Now the only laughter that existed was in memory, and it no longer stung. The wind tugged at my jacket, flapping the corner of the metal ribbon against my chest. I reached up, fingers brushing the bronze. "You were right, Jacob," I whispered. Standing tall was worth it. The sea answered with another wave. Over the next few weeks, invitations flooded in, conferences, panels, podcasts. People wanted to hear the story behind the quote, but there was no story left to tell. The story had already done its job. I chose instead to write not speeches, but letters. To Gold Star parents, to young soldiers, to anyone who'd reached out in pain. I wrote until my hand cramped, each note personal, each one ending with the same sentence, "Honor begins where appearances end." One morning, I received a package from the Pentagon. Inside was a framed photo of the ceremony, the secretary. Shaking my hand, the caption engraved below, "Integrity in service and silence." I hung it on the wall beside Jacob's flag. The two images, his folded memory and my open redemption, balanced each other perfectly. A week later, Lyle called. "You've seen the numbers," he asked. "What numbers? Your quotes being added to the Gold Star family's orientation manual. It's going to be official doctrine, Dana. The new recruits' parents will read it during family briefings." I blinked, stunned. "You're serious?" "Completely. The brass wants your permission to include your name." I smiled into the phone. "They can keep the name. Just keep the message." "Understood, Major." He paused. You did good. I hung up and sat on the porch watching a pair of pelicans dive for fish. Somewhere behind me, the kettle whistled. I didn't move. For years, my life had been measured by rank loss duty and defiance. But now it was measured by air sunlight and the faint peace that comes from knowing nothing more needs to be said. On Memorial Day, I returned to Arlington. The cemetery was filled with people, families, flags, folded chairs. The Gold Star banner hung gently from the main gate. I walked to Jacob's grave again, the grass soft and damp beneath my shoes. Someone had already placed fresh flowers there, white lilies his favorite. I stood in silence for a long time before kneeling. You did it, Jacob, I murmured. You changed everything. A child nearby was reading names aloud with his mother, his small voice clear and careful. I looked over and smiled. The mother caught my eye and nodded that quiet understanding shared between strangers who've lost the same thing. I rose, brushed the dirt from my knees, and turned toward the rows of flags. The sun caught the bronze of my medal, scattering light like a reflection of all the voices that had been silent too long. As I walked away, the camera crews filming Memorial Day coverage caught sight of me. One reporter called out Major Reeves one more quote for the broadcast. I stopped, then turned slightly, the wind lifting my hair. No, I said softly. I've said enough. The reporter smiled understanding. The footage aired that evening anyway, a woman walking away from the field of flags head high, the medal glinting in the sunlight. The network didn't need narration. They just played my voice from the earlier interview over the final shot. They laughed once. Now, silence is my salute. Across the country, people stopped scrolling for a moment. Veterans stood a little straighter. Parents hugged their children tighter. And somewhere, maybe even in Savannah, two aging hearts finally understood that love built on control can't survive the truth. The screen faded to black, but the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. It was peace. If you've ever been told to stay silent to protect appearances, tell me, did silence ever protect you, or did it protect them? I want you to think about that for a moment before you scroll away, because for years I believed silence was strength. I believed composure meant control, that staying calm meant staying safe. But silence doesn't protect peace. It protects the people who caused the damage. It keeps the truth neat, the pictures framed, and the pain hidden where no one has to see it. Somewhere out there tonight, there's a mother like me sitting at her kitchen table staring at the folded flag that used to hang on her wall. There's a veteran walking down a grocery aisle catching a glimpse of a uniform in an ad and remembering the voice that told them they brought shame instead of pride. There's someone right now. Maybe you wondering if speaking up will ruin what's left of your family, your job, your reputation. And I want to tell you this, truth will cost you something, but silence will cost you everything. When I first stood on that parade ground at Fort Liberty, my parents laughed in front of my unit. I thought my career would end there. Instead, it began. Because that day, the silence they expected became the voice I'd been holding back for years. It wasn't revenge, it was justice wrapped in honesty. To everyone watching this who's ever worn a uniform, this one's for you. You know what it means to stand still when your heart is breaking. You know what it's like to bury someone who believed in the same flag that now feels heavier to salute. You've stood through grief, through misunderstanding, through the kind of loneliness only service can teach. And yet, you kept standing. I know some of you are watching from towns I've never been to. From small churches in Oklahoma to quiet porches in Maine, to VA hospitals in California where the TV hums in the background. Some of you are watching from places like Fort Campbell, Fort Hood, or Naval Station Norfolk, places where uniforms dry on lines outside like prayer flags. Tell me where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments, because when you say it out loud, you remind others they're not alone. Maybe you lost someone too. Maybe you were the one blamed for surviving. Maybe your story never made the news because you were told it was better to keep it in the family. But truth doesn't live in closed rooms. It lives in open air, in voices that shake but keep speaking. I read letters every week from people who say, "Your story helped me tell mine." That's not about me, it's about the moment we stop protecting appearances and start protecting truth. It's about remembering that love built on fear isn't love, it's performance. If you're one of those people who've carried silence like armor, I want to challenge you tonight. Write one sentence. Say one truth. It doesn't have to be public. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours. That's how healing starts, not in applause but in honesty. To the veterans, the Gold Star families, the ones who've lost, and the ones who still serve, thank you. You don't owe anyone perfection. You owe yourself peace. To the parents watching, I'll ask again if love depends on obedience. Is it really love or just control in disguise? The day I stopped mistaking control for love was the day I got my life back. I hope you get yours too. If you've ever been told to toughen up, keep quiet, or not make a scene, know this. Those phrases were never about strength. They were about silence. And strength doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing up, even if your voice shakes, even if no one claps. Especially then. I know some of you have complicated families, people who only love you when you fit their mold. I had those too. The truth is, you can love someone and still walk away. You can respect where you came from and still refuse to stay buried there. You can stand alone and still be whole. This story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what shame tried to steal, about saying you can't define me by your comfort anymore. And if you've ever been in that place, if you've ever had to choose between peace and pretending, I hope you choose peace, even if it costs you applause, even if it means starting over. Silence once was my inheritance, but now it's my salute. Because sometimes the loudest stand you can take is the one where you stop explaining yourself to people who never cared to understand. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever been told to stay quiet for the sake of image, for the sake of family, for the sake of not causing trouble. Tell me how that silence felt. Did it heal you or just hide you? And if you've ever worn the uniform, I want you to drop your branch in the comments. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, National Guard. Whoever you are, you belong here. This space is yours. I know some of you watching right now are parents of soldiers, veterans, or first responders. You've buried more than most could imagine and still get up every morning. You've stood beside folded flags and played host to silence that felt unbearable. This is your story too. Your courage isn't in smiling for photos, it's in continuing to live when the world stopped for you. Maybe you're not military at all. Maybe your war happened inside your home in words that cut deeper than shrapnel in years of walking on eggshells around people who said they loved you but couldn't stand your strength. This story is yours too. You fought a different kind of battle, but the courage it takes to break free is the same. So before this video ends, I want to leave you with one last thought. The opposite of fear isn't bravery, it's truth. Bravery is just truth spoken out loud. And truth once spoken doesn't go back in the box. If you felt something in this story, share it. Not for numbers, not for algorithms, but for connection. Because someone out there needs to know that silence can break and you'll still be standing. And if you see a soldier, a veteran, a first responder, or even a stranger who looks tired, say something kind. Sometimes a few words of acknowledgement can sound louder than any salute. They laughed once, but they don't laugh anymore. Because truth, once it stands tall, doesn't bow again. So here's my invitation. If you've ever lost something or someone to silence, if you've ever been told your pain is too loud, I want you to comment where you're watching from. Tell me your state, your town, your base. Let's remind the world that honor doesn't belong to image, it belongs to integrity. And if you've ever worn a uniform, if you've ever stood on a field, saluted the flag, or said goodbye to someone who never came home, this one's for you.